So here was the process. And if I did it today, it would be slightly differently. But what I had to do at the time is, first of all, I knew that Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew was part of, Hebrew Matthew was part of a book Shem Tov wrote called Even Bochan. So the first thing I did is I sat down at the National Library of Israel and the Institute of Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts, and I pulled up on their Aleph computer system, which we could say Aleph of blessed memory because
you brought me down there.
No, not just down there. Their computer system called Aleph no longer exists. I was actually there at the library in Jerusalem when they announced that they were imminently about to end this system. And one of the scholars who was down there said, "You don't understand. 80% of the new discoveries in Jewish studies take place in this room using Aleph. And we've had this system for decades. If you abolish the Aleph system, we won't be able to continue doing research." And there was actually a protest.
Get out of here.
And I was part of this protest saying, you guys can't do this. You can't abolish the Aleph database. And the reason, it was incredible. Here's a great story, Keith. My sister, Ayala, who lives in Modi'in, Israel, invited me to Shabbat lunch at her house with her family. She's an Orthodox Jew. And she invited these other folks because they had heard I'm a Karaite and they wanted to meet a Karaite. So we're sitting down at Shabbat lunch, and her friend, who's a woman about her age, says, she's there with her husband, and this woman says, I was at the National Library of Israel at the basement in the Institute of Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscript, and these scholars were protesting. And I said, I was there, and I was one of the leaders of the protest. So back up about 15 years before this protest, quite a few before that, I'm sitting there typing away on the Aleph database of blessed memory, and I'm looking for every manuscript of Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. That's number one. And then what I have to do is I fill out this little patek, this little piece of paper, and I hand it to the librarian, and they disappear. And they come back with a microfilm. Yes. And I pull out the microfilm and I go through the microfilm looking in Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew in Even Bochan, the book that Shem Tov wrote called The Touchstone. I'm looking for Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. Sometimes it's a manuscript of Shem Tov's book, and it ends in chapter 5, and it never gets to Hebrew Matthew. Why does it end in chapter 5? Because worms came and ate those pages, right? So it doesn't include Hebrew Matthew. So I go through every manuscript of Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, of Even Bochan, to find the ones that have Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. And then I say, let me take this one step further. Let me look for everything in the catalog that mentions Brit Chadashah, New Testament, that mentions Matthew, and I go through dozens and dozens of microfilms looking to see what they have. And I find all kinds of interesting things. I find there's the Gospel of Matthew in this University of Stockholm or something like that, somewhere in Sweden, I don't remember where even. I find all these different Hebrew New Testament texts. And then but I'm not finding their Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. And then I start looking for anything that mentions collections, because here was the Achilles heel. Not everything was fully cataloged that I needed to find. What do I mean by cataloged? So a lot of times there was a Jew in the Middle Ages who maybe he was a doctor or he was some kind of government official, but he was also a scholar in his spare time. And he would go to the local scribe and he'd say, I'm interested in this subject. Can you put together a manuscript for me? And these weren't printed. These were custom handwritten documents. Put together a manuscript for me that has something on grammar, something on Jewish arguments with Christians, something on history, maybe a little bit about Bible commentary. And the scribe would go to his shelf and he would pull out different books and he would copy all or parts of those books into this manuscript. And so you have a certain type of manuscript that is a kovetz, a collection. And what are in those collections? Sometimes we have detailed information of what's on every page. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes the catalog just says collection. So I went and looked at dozens, maybe hundreds of these collections, looking for Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, thinking maybe it's in there. And I found some. Wow. And that's how I ended up with 28 manuscripts. Wow. Once I had those manuscripts, first I had them in microfilm, and then I had to get permission to image them, let's put it that way. And in some cases back then, the only way I could get images is they'd say, well, we can't give you permission to take a photocopy. That's what people could do back then. Because when we, the Institute of Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts, we traveled to the Vatican and they said, yeah, you can photograph our manuscripts, but only if you agree not to let anybody make copies of them. If they want copies, they should contact us and pay us money. And I ended up contacting numerous libraries, and in some cases I bought my own black and white microfilm. This is before digitization. And I actually, as we were doing the study, in the middle of the study, I said, wait a minute, I think I still have some of these microfilms. And I went and pulled out from a shelf, and I had a box that said microfilms on it, and I opened it up, and I found a bunch of microfilms. Some of these microfilms I've had for over 15 years.
Yep.
And I realized, wait a minute, I have those digitized, but that was digitized back 15 years ago. I could do a lot better today. We have much higher resolution. So I sent them away to a company. I haven't gotten them back yet, but I sent them away to this company to redigitize some of those manuscripts. But in order to do the basic work that we're doing, first I had to do that painstaking legwork in which I spent hundreds of hours looking through things. 99% of what I opened up had nothing to do with Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, but I wouldn't know that until I looked through it. And I was able to eventually collect a list of 28 manuscripts that have Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew or portions of Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew.